I used to believe that family gatherings were sacred, that no matter how complicated things got, Easter dinner at Grandma's farmhouse would be a time for peace. If not love, then at least civility. But this year, a single sentence shattered everything I thought I knew. When my brother Joseph sneered, "Tech's not for hobbyists," I forced a smile and reached for the deviled eggs. But then Grandma dropped a bomb so casually it felt rehearsed. "Isn't it funny, dear? Michelle's company just bought Joseph's app platform." Silence. Stares. Then chaos. If you've ever had a sibling twist the knife with a smile, or watched your own family side with the wrong person just to keep the peace, this story is for you. Because what happened next, it didn't just ruin Easter. It changed everything. I've never cared for flashy things. I don't wear designer. I drive a practical hybrid. And my idea of a splurge is a rare Pinot from a Napa boutique I adore. I built my business with discipline and night owl hours, not seed money or inherited connections. And maybe that's why Joseph's jabs still sting, even at 33. Easter at Grandma Ruth's farmhouse in rural Michigan is a family tradition, the kind with linen napkins and pastel-tinted deviled eggs. A Norman Rockwell painting, if Norman included side eyes and passive-aggressive toasts. This year, the farmhouse smelled like sugar-glazed ham and barely disguised judgment. Joseph, my older brother by 4 years and self-proclaimed tech visionary, showed up in a tailored cobalt blazer and his signature arrogance. The kind of guy who uses the phrase, "disrupt the vertical," without irony. He hugged me stiffly, then loudly asked, "Still tinkering with that edtech thing, Michelle?" That edtech thing now employs 42 people across 2 states and just inked a contract with a major school district. But sure, let's reduce it to a hobby. I smiled, polite as ever. Still growing. He chuckled, slicing into the lamb. "Well, tech's not really for hobbyists, you know." And that's when Grandma Ruth, who's hard of hearing but never misses a moment worth stirring, chimed in like she was reading from a press release. "Didn't Michelle's company just buy your app platform, Joey?" That's what my friend Donna's grandson told me. The fork froze in my hand. The table went still. My mother dropped her napkin. My cousin Abigail coughed violently into her mimosa. And Joseph? Joseph turned the color of undercooked salmon. For a moment, I thought maybe, just maybe, he'd laugh it off. But his eyes locked on me like I'd detonated a bomb under the table. "You what?" he said, voice too calm. All eyes were on me. The room spun. This wasn't how I wanted it to come out. Not today. Not like this. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Grandma had already served the truth, like a second helping of mashed potatoes. Can you imagine being in that moment? Your biggest professional win? The culmination of months of tense negotiations, revealed by your grandmother over a platter of asparagus? And worse, your brother didn't look betrayed. He looked threatened. What would you have done? Defended yourself? Played dumb? I chose neither. I excused myself, heart pounding, ears ringing, and walked out onto the porch, into the cold Michigan wind. It didn't matter that the deal had been legal, strategic, and anonymous through holding companies. What mattered now was that Joseph knew, and he wasn't going to take it well. The screen door creaked behind me before I could catch my breath. Joseph followed, his footsteps sharp against the wood planks. "You think this is funny?" he said, his voice low, but tight with barely leashed fury. "Buying my company behind my back? At Grandma's table?" I turned to face him. "It wasn't personal, Joseph. It was a strategic acquisition. Clean. Through a third-party firm. Like any normal transaction." He laughed bitterly. "Strategic? You sniped my startup out from under me like a vulture. You've been watching me fail, waiting for the perfect moment to swoop in and claim the scraps." I crossed my arms. It was hemorrhaging users and backed by ghost data. It was a liability. He took a step closer, towering over me. "You think you're the hero now? Buying me out while I was down?" I didn't flinch. "I think I saved you from a lawsuit. You had unverified metrics and a leaky privacy policy. If anyone should be mad, it's my board for letting me go through with it." His jaw tightened. He wasn't used to hearing that kind of truth from me. From behind us, the door slammed open again. "Kids!" our mother hissed, looking around the porch as if the neighbors might be hiding in the shrubs. Can we not do this out here? People are still finishing dessert. Mom, Joseph snapped, do you have any idea what she just did? Yes, she said quickly, her eyes darting to me, and we will discuss it, privately, but this is Easter. Could we at least pretend to be a family for one day? A family. Pretend. That part almost made me laugh. Joseph shook his head, storming back inside, shoulders stiff with rage. I stood rooted on the porch, trying to decide whether I wanted to cry or scream. I did neither. Instead, I followed him back in, because what choice did I have? The moment I stepped through the doorway, it felt like walking into a staged crime scene, everyone pretending nothing just exploded, even though the emotional debris was still hanging in the air. Grandma sat serenely, sipping her tea like she'd just commented on the weather. Abigail avoided eye contact. Uncle Gerald shoved a buttered roll into his mouth to avoid speaking. And Dad was busy adjusting the thermostat like that could fix the room temperature. But then Joseph turned toward me again, in front of everyone. His voice rang out like the clash of crystal against tile. So Michelle, want to explain how long you've been spying on me? I blinked. Excuse me? You heard me. He tossed his napkin onto his plate. You can't tell me this was a coincidence, that you just happened to buy out my company. What? You had someone on the inside? Stealing data? Monitoring my users? Gasps. Grandma dropped her teacup. I looked at him, stunned. That's ridiculous. But he wasn't done. You always envied me, he said. I built something from nothing, and you couldn't stand that, so you waited for it to wobble and then stabbed me in the back with a contract. Across the table, our mother's voice cracked. Stop. Please, Joseph, don't air dirty laundry today. His face flushed deeper. This isn't dirty laundry, Mom. This is espionage. I didn't spy on you, I said, louder than I meant to. I acquired a floundering platform through legal channels. You're angry because you didn't know. But don't twist this into something it's not, he pointed at me. You always thought you were better. Just because you played nice and built your little nerd empire. I stood there, heat rising to my cheeks, hands clenched. But I didn't say anything more. Not yet, because somewhere in his eyes, behind the outrage and the humiliation, I saw something else. Something quieter. Fear. He wasn't just angry I'd bought the company. He was terrified of what else I might find. That was the moment I realized this wasn't over. This was the beginning. That night, I couldn't sleep. The Michigan wind tapped at my guest bedroom window, whispering like a nosy aunt who'd seen too much at dinner. Downstairs, the floorboards creaked as relatives packed up leftovers and silent regrets. I stayed curled under Grandma's quilt, staring at the ceiling, pulse still thudding from the evening's wreckage. Joseph's accusations had been outrageous, but oddly specific. Why leap to espionage? I hadn't wanted it to come out like that. Our legal team had intentionally masked the acquisition behind a shell partner, standard practice. But now, Joseph knew. And if he was reacting this strongly, then there was something else beneath his outrage. At 2:13 a.m., I gave up trying to sleep and reached for my laptop. A new email sat at the top of my inbox. Subject line: Urgent JSoft deal. Press requests incoming. My stomach dropped. I clicked. Our firm's head of communications had sent the note just after midnight. Michelle, media's catching wind of the JSoft acquisition. TechSage posted a speculative piece on the buyer identity and tagged your name. We've received 6 press inquiries asking for confirmation. Advise on holding statement ASAP. I rubbed my forehead. So much for anonymity. The next email, timestamped just minutes later, was from Andrew Lin, a name I hadn't heard in over a decade. I remembered Andrew vaguely from Joseph's college days. He'd been in Joseph's startup cohort at Berkeley, a finance guy with sharp suits and a quieter kind of ambition. Subject: Michelle, please read. Joseph. The message was brief. Too brief. Hi Michelle, I saw the JSoft news and thought you should know. Joseph's been shifting funds through an offshore shell tied to one of your pending assets. Not sure if it's still connected post-acquisition, but if your compliance team hasn't reviewed all the back-end code, I'd do it fast. This could blow back hard. Call me if you need details. A. My blood turned cold. Offshore shell? I clicked through to our secure integration dashboard. The migration from Joseph's platform into our ecosystem had begun 2 weeks ago. Slow, segmented, just the way we liked it. But we hadn't completed the full audit yet. We'd assumed the code was stable enough to start minor alignment. A calculated risk, and now it might be the biggest mistake of my career. I forwarded the email to our legal counsel and lead engineer, flagging it urgent. Then, I sat very still. What had I missed? Joseph wasn't just bluffing at dinner. He was trying to distract. He knew what was buried in that code, and he knew it could burn me just as much as him. Suddenly, his paranoia made perfect sense. I pulled up a set of back-end logs from the integration sandbox. The metadata tags were riddled with anomalies, references to user pools we hadn't imported, redirects to domains that didn't match our safety protocols, and one curious line, buried under legacy flags, /gateway/alpha_pacific_node, JSI froze. Alpha Pacific was the name of an offshore investment group we'd flagged years ago for suspicious licensing behavior. It was there, in the code, in my codebase now. I shut the laptop. Everything in me wanted to believe this was just a misfire, a forgotten snippet, maybe even a failed experiment Joseph never deleted. But I knew better. Joseph hadn't just built a faulty platform. He'd hidden landmines in the code, and now they were under my feet. By sunrise, I'd decided what to do. Integration paused. Full audit. And no more second guessing. This wasn't about sibling rivalry anymore. This was about survival. By Monday morning, my hands had stopped trembling, but my voice still caught slightly when I called Marcus, my CTO. We need to halt the integration, I said. Everything. Freeze the codebase, pull the dev environments offline, and initiate a red flag audit. There was a pause on the line. Then, you found something. I found enough. I didn't tell him about the offshore link. Not yet, but I didn't need to. Marcus knew me well enough to catch the current beneath my words. By noon, we'd assembled a strike team. Internal security, compliance, engineering, and one very sleep-deprived lawyer. I walked into the boardroom, dropped Andrew Lynn's email onto the table, and watched as their expressions darkened. This is the primary issue, I said, pulling up the logs. Joseph's legacy code contains unauthorized redirects and metadata markers, pointing to an entity under investigation. If we'd completed the migration, these would be live within our infrastructure and trigger a federal review, our legal counsel muttered. Or worse, an FTC probe. Silence. The stakes snapped into focus then. This wasn't just about bad optics. It was about liability, exposure. My company, everything I'd built, could be dragged into regulatory hell because of a brother who couldn't keep his ambition clean. We're pausing the rollout indefinitely, I said. I'll take the hit with the board, but we're not gambling our future on his past. Marcus gave a grim nod. Smart call. The team dispersed into motion, deconstructing, inspecting, isolating the toxic segments. By evening, the first report landed on my desk. It was worse than I expected. A set of buried subroutines, clever, almost too clever, rerouted usage data through an intermediary server cluster registered in the Cayman Islands. The effect? Artificially inflated engagement metrics. On paper, Joseph's platform looked 10 times more active than it actually was. Fake users, phantom sessions, falsified retention curves. My chest ached with dread. He hadn't just exaggerated his success. He had fabricated an entire user ecosystem to woo buyers. To lure me. I felt sick. I'd trusted the sanitized pitch, the sandbox demo, the legacy explanations in the codebase. I trusted that because Joseph, as flawed as he was, wouldn't risk a crime just to prove a point. But he had. And now, he'd dragged me into it. I closed the report and sat back in my chair, staring at the ceiling tiles. This was sabotage disguised as incompetence. Or maybe it wasn't even that disguised. Maybe, deep down, Joseph had always known I'd come knocking someday. And he'd left me a landmine as a gift. Well, he was about to find out what happened when you underestimate the quiet one. The next morning, I made a call that felt like I was crossing a bridge I couldn't walk back over. "Hi, This is Michelle Reed. I'd like to retain your firm for an immediate third-party forensic audit. Scope: full inspection of acquired assets, specifically the JSoft platform. Yes, today, if possible. No more protecting him. No more family shielding. If Joseph wanted to pretend this was a vendetta, fine. I'd let the numbers tell the story. By noon, the firm's analysts were in our data lab. Within hours, they confirmed what we'd started to suspect. Joseph's app wasn't just misleading, it was fraudulent. The user metrics? A Potemkin village of bots and loops. The active engagement graphs? Rewritten scripts triggered by back-end cron jobs. The privacy policy? Outdated, contradictory, and unenforceable. If we hadn't caught this before integration, our next investor meeting could have ended with handcuffs. This is FTC bait, the lead auditor said, frowning. Your legal team will want to prepare disclosures. And soon? I nodded, calm on the outside. Inside, I was unraveling, not because of the risk. We were locking it down in time. But because I knew what this meant. Joseph hadn't just been reckless. He'd been intentional. This wasn't the result of a panicked coder trying to keep the lights on. This was designed. A masquerade meant to inflate his value, sell the illusion, and skip out before the curtain dropped. And I had almost let him get away with it. The audit summary hit my inbox late that night. A 42-page PDF with redlined violations, call-outs, and liability risk trees that made my eyes blur. But buried on page 31 was something I didn't expect. Note: isolated encryption subroutine found in Corch Prime _alpha/vault, PY, unreferenced, in main app. Appears stable. Signature suggests non-primary contributor. Code review suggests strong original logic structure. Translation? Someone else, had written a piece of code inside Joseph's broken machine that was clean, elegant, even promising. Who authored this? I asked Marcus the next morning. He ran a contributor check. The ID came up, EZO_intern. We dug a little deeper. Ella Joe, a summer intern Joseph had barely mentioned during his due diligence notes. No LinkedIn profile, no portfolio, just a name on a subroutine that none of us had noticed because it had no active calls. Until now. Michelle, Marcus said quietly, this algorithm, if what I'm seeing is correct, it could be the foundation for our next-gen adaptive learning module. It took me a second to process. Even in the wreckage, something of value had survived. And not because of Joseph. Because of a quiet intern he probably ignored. I want her found, I said. We're going to buy out her IP rights, and when we go public with the audit, we'll credit her by name. Marcus raised an eyebrow. You're serious? I looked him dead in the eye. Joseph buried fraud in that code, but Ella buried gold. It wasn't just a business decision, it was a message. To Joseph, to my team, to myself, that I would never again let someone else's legacy dictate the integrity of my own. When the buyout papers landed on Ella Jo's desk, she thought it was a prank. Her reply email read simply, "Wait, what?" I flew her in that weekend. She was barely 23, fresh out of Caltech, with oversized glasses and an apologetic posture that made me ache. She hadn't even known the algorithm was still in the build. I wrote that on my last week, she said, voice barely above a whisper. Joseph told me not to include it in the final push. Said it was too theoretical. I smiled gently. Ella, it's not just theoretical. It's brilliant. You wrote a way to dynamically calibrate cognitive drift in real time using test performance. That's revolutionary. Her face flushed. You're serious? Dead serious. We signed the paperwork that afternoon. A 5-figure buyout, plus a standing invitation to join our research team when she was ready. But more importantly, we credited her, publicly. When the audit went live, so did our announcement. Following a third-party forensic audit, EDU Thrive has halted integration of the JSoft platform due to significant irregularities in data integrity. We have discovered within the codebase a secure algorithm authored by intern Ella Jo, which will be preserved, protected, and developed further. Ms. Zhou will receive full compensation and recognition. It hit the trades within hours. TechSage, The Circuit, even the Education Times. And just like that, the narrative flipped. Joseph had gone silent since Easter. But I knew this would smoke him out. Because for someone like Joseph, public silence isn't peace. It's agony. When he finally called, it wasn't with rage. It was with venom masked as charm. "Well played," he said. "Really clever. Making yourself look like the hero while burying me in the fine print." "You buried yourself, Joseph," I replied. I just turned on the lights. "You think the board's gonna praise you for this? You tanked a whole rollout over what? Some junior coder's pet project?" I didn't answer. Instead, I let the silence hang. Because the truth was bigger than that. This wasn't about punishing Joseph. It was about choosing transparency, even when it was inconvenient, even when it threatened what I'd built. He finally broke the pause. "You think this is over?" "No," I said quietly. "I think this is just the part where the world sees what you really built." A long breath on the other end. Then the call disconnected. I leaned back in my chair, hands shaking. Not with fear, but with relief. The line had been drawn. My company was safe. My conscience was clear. And Joseph? Joseph had finally run out of places to hide. The papers came on a Tuesday. A courier, in a navy windbreaker, knocked on my office door and handed me a manila envelope with my name typed in stiff, lawyerly font. My assistant looked startled. I wasn't. I already knew what it was. Joseph had gone quiet for too long. It wasn't his style to accept public humiliation without trying to claw something back. Inside, a formal lawsuit. Defamation. Theft of intellectual property. I stared at the words, rereading them even though they hadn't changed. Theft. He was accusing me of stealing his platform, his data, his brand, despite having willingly sold it through the acquisition. And defamation? Because I dared to publish an audit that exposed his manipulation? The nerve would have been laughable if it hadn't been so precise. "Classic redirect," my attorney said as she scanned the documents. "He's not trying to win. He's trying to stall, poison the narrative, make it look messy enough that no one digs deeper." "Or trust me," I murmured. She nodded. "That too." The press caught wind within 24 hours. Headlines blared with words like family feud and sibling sabotage. Comment sections turned into a battleground, half strangers championing my decision, half armchair analysts insisting I had destroyed my brother for profit. The story leaked into investor calls. It slipped into partnership reviews. Even clients who'd known me for years started asking off-the-record questions. The most painful blow came quietly, from within. One of our junior analysts resigned with a terse email citing, quote, "professional discomfort with ongoing internal disputes." She hadn't even worked on the JSoft project, but the shadow of the lawsuit had spread like ink in water. I spent that week in a haze of rebuttal prep, team reassurances, and staring at news alerts like they were weather warnings I couldn't change. It was exhausting, lonely, and deeply unfair. And the worst part? My family believed him. Mom called 2 days after the news broke. Her voice was tight, distant. "Why would you go public like that, Michelle? Couldn't this have been handled privately? You made Joseph look like a criminal." "Mom," I said slowly, "he falsified data. He committed fraud." Her silence was deafening. "You don't know the pressure he's been under," she finally said. "All you ever do is win. Maybe he just wanted one thing." "He didn't just want one thing. He nearly took down my company. I saved it." Another pause. "You're both my children. I won't choose sides." But she already had. She always had. And now I wasn't just defending a business decision. I was fighting to keep my own mother from painting me as the villain in a story Joseph had set on fire. That night, I stared at the ceiling above my bed, listening to the creak of the furnace and the quiet ticking of the clock on my nightstand. All I had done was tell the truth. But somehow, in the court of public opinion, and, worse, in the echo chamber of my own family, I was the traitor, not the rescuer, not the strategist, not the sister who pulled the plug before the bomb exploded, just the problem. And yet, somewhere beneath the exhaustion, I felt it again, that flicker. Not rage, not fear. Resolve. Joseph could drag me through court. He could twist the story, but I knew the truth. I knew what was in the code. I had the audit, the contracts, the receipts, and I had something he'd never counted on. I had nothing left to lose. 2 weeks after the lawsuit was filed, I stood in a sterile mediation room, staring at the man who once held my hand across the street when I was 5, now refusing to look me in the eye. Joseph sat across from me at a long wooden table, flanked by his lawyer, and clutching a stainless steel water bottle like it might shield him from consequence. His jaw was tight, lips pursed in that old expression I remembered from every childhood board game he lost. We weren't here because he'd had a change of heart. The judge had ordered mediation before the trial, citing, quote, familial complexity and public harm. I knew what that really meant. No one wanted to see this circus hit open court. A court-appointed advisor sat between us, clipboard in hand. She looked like someone who'd been through 50 of these and didn't expect much from 51. Let's start with mutual intentions, she said. Michelle? I cleared my throat. I'm here to protect my company, my team, and the intern whose code you buried in fraud. Joseph rolled his eyes. Spare me the Nobility Act. The advisor cut in. Joseph, you'll get your turn. He leaned back, folding his arms. My intention is to recover what was stolen from me and protect my name from slander. I almost laughed. You mean the name you stapled to fake metrics and offshore laundering? He leaned forward, eyes dark. You think you're so righteous, but you waited. You watched me sink, then bought my work out from under me like a scavenger. I bought it to protect my company, I said, voice low. And I found a working algorithm you never even noticed. You were too busy building a castle out of matchsticks. You always had it easier, he spat. You were the golden child with your quiet genius and moral compass. I was the show pony who had to earn everything with flash and pitch decks. I blinked. You think I had it easy? He stared. Didn't you? I leaned forward. I had to build something that worked, not looked like it did. I had to sit in rooms where no one took me seriously until the numbers proved them wrong. And you, I hesitated, but the words wouldn't stop. You didn't want success, Joseph. You wanted applause. And when the clapping stopped, you rewrote the script. The advisor cleared her throat again. Let's bring this back. No? I said. Let him hear it. Joseph didn't interrupt. He just sat there, something unreadable flickering in his expression. I let the silence stretch. Maybe the mediation wouldn't solve anything, but something was shifting. Because for the first time, Joseph wasn't fighting back. Not with sarcasm, not with lies. He was listening. The advisor closed her folder. The judge wants another session tomorrow. I recommend you both sleep on this. As we stood to leave, Joseph spoke. Quietly, not to the advisor, to me. You think I meant to ruin it? I looked at him. I think you didn't care enough if you did. He nodded slowly, almost a concession. Almost. Outside, the cold air hit my skin like a reset button. I exhaled, watching my breath bloom into the February sky. The lawsuit was still alive, the damage still raw. But for the first time since Easter, Joseph had stopped performing. And maybe, just maybe, that was the start of something real. We didn't speak that night. No late texts, no legal threats, no email volleys from our attorneys. It was unsettling, that silence. The next morning, I arrived early at the mediation office, unsure what version of Joseph would walk through the door. Angry Joseph? Deflecting Joseph? Or worse, smug, performative Joseph, the one who treated apologies like PR stunts? But when he entered the room, he didn't bring a lawyer. Just himself. No blazer, no defense, no armor. He sat down across from me and, for a long moment, said nothing. Then, without ceremony, I sabotaged the back end. My breath caught. I left the redirect scripts in place after the first investor round, he said. I told myself it was temporary, just to get through the quarter. Then I layered on the bots, the fake engagement. I studied his face, tired, pale, honest in a way I hadn't seen in years. Why? He rubbed the back of his neck. Because no one cared when I did things right? Not the VCs, not the media, not even mom and dad. That's not true, I started. It is, he cut in softly. Do you know the last time they talked about something I built without comparing it to you? I looked down. I wasn't trying to ruin your company, he said. But I wasn't thinking about protecting it either. I didn't think you'd be the buyer. I thought maybe Google, or someone too big to notice. He let out a bitter laugh. And then Grandma drops your name over asparagus. A long pause passed. I always felt like the decoy, he said. The loud one who distracts while the real genius does the real work. The one who sparkles until the audience realizes it's just foil, not gold. His voice broke a little. I didn't want to hate you. I really didn't. But every time you won, I felt smaller. I swallowed hard. You never told me, I said. You never asked. We sat there, two siblings, unraveling a lifetime of miscommunication in a 10-by-10 room with plastic chairs and a ticking wall clock. Finally, I said, the code you buried could have destroyed me. But I'm still standing, and you are, too. Barely. He gave a sad smile. So what now? I don't know, I admitted. But the lawsuit doesn't help either of us. You know that. He nodded. I'll drop it, and I'll testify at the FTC meeting, if it comes to that. Say everything. Take the hit. And Ella? I asked. She deserves every dollar you gave her. And more. I didn't even remember her name. There it was. A moment of clarity. Not redemption. Not yet. But something close. He stood up first. I was scared of disappearing, he said. Of becoming the brother nobody remembered. I stood too. You didn't need to sabotage your way into our story, I said. You were always part of it. He nodded slowly. As he walked toward the exit, I didn't stop him, didn't hug him, didn't forgive him on the spot, but I watched. Because sometimes healing doesn't come with a handshake. Sometimes it begins when someone finally stops pretending they weren't wrong. And when someone else, after everything, chooses to stay in the room anyway. 3 weeks later, Joseph sat beside me at a long oak table in a government building downtown, his posture rigid, mine steadied by necessity. The FTC compliance officer on the other side adjusted her glasses and flipped open a folder that might as well have held my future. The hearing wasn't dramatic. No jury. No cross-examinations. Just questions. Documentation. More questions. But when Joseph leaned into the mic and said yes, the code was designed to inflate usage metrics, I nearly stopped breathing. He went on, voice flat but unwavering. I wrote the original bot scripts. I added the reroute loop. Michelle had no knowledge of the manipulations prior to acquisition. The officer nodded, jotting notes, expression unreadable. She glanced at me. Ms. Reed, did your team take any steps after discovering the irregularities? I slid forward the audit packet. We halted integration immediately, initiated a third-party review, identified the intern who authored the viable algorithm, purchased her IP rights, and credited her publicly. We filed a full transparency report before this hearing was even scheduled. She reviewed it briefly, then said, "Thank you." We were dismissed less than 20 minutes later. No fines, no sanctions, a pending formal letter of clearance to be delivered within the week. It was over. Outside, on the courthouse steps, Joseph lit a cigarette with shaking fingers. I didn't even know he smoked again. Guess I'll be trending for all the wrong reasons tomorrow, he muttered. I looked at him. You did the right thing. That's worth something. He laughed softly. Doesn't feel like it. Redemption rarely does. A pause. Mom still thinks you orchestrated this, he said. I know. She says I should never have admitted fault. That I handed you the crown. I sighed. I didn't want a crown. I wanted clarity. He nodded, exhaling smoke into the spring breeze. You got it. And then some. For a moment, we just stood there. Two grown adults who had once shared bunk beds and Christmas stockings, now navigating the fallout of ambition and old wounds. You know, he said slowly, when Grandma spilled the deal at Easter, I wasn't angry about the acquisition. Not really. No? He shook his head. I was angry because you beat me at my own game, and worse, you didn't even try to. That stunned me more than anything else had. I didn't respond right away. What could I say? That I hadn't meant to win a war. One didn't know we were fighting? I hope, he added, someday I build something that earns your respect. The real kind. You already did, I said. You just buried it in fear. He turned to me then, really looked at me, and in his expression was something quiet, not quite peace, but maybe the road there. "I'll see you at Easter," he said. I smiled, tired but sincere. "Only if you follow the new rules." He raised an eyebrow. "You're making Easter rules now?" "Absolutely," I said. "Rule 1, no business at the table. Rule 2, no barbed jokes pretending to be compliments. Rule 3. Rule 3? I looked at him and said, "We show up as who we really are. No illusions. No armor." Joseph didn't laugh. He just nodded once. And for the first time in a very long time, I believed him. The air was thick with spring warmth, sunlight filtering through the budding branches of Grandma Ruth's old oak tree. It was Easter again, and the farmhouse was alive with the subtle sounds of family. Plates clinking, laughter rising like a soft melody, children chasing the last stray butterfly of the afternoon. This time, there was no tension simmering beneath the surface, no silent wars behind polite smiles. Just a table set with pastel linens and fresh flowers. A deliberate break from the past. I arrived first, stepping onto the porch with a nervous excitement I hadn't felt in years. My hands trembled slightly as I smoothed the napkins, glanced around the familiar yard, and tried to steady my breath. Joseph pulled up just minutes later. He parked his car quietly, then stepped out, shoulders relaxed, but eyes thoughtful. The arrogant swagger was gone. In its place was something softer, an understanding that hadn't been there before. Our eyes met. He offered a small, tentative smile. "Michelle." "Joseph," I replied, my own smile faltering but genuine. We stood there a heartbeat too long, the years of rivalry and resentment packed into that silent moment. Then, with a shake of his head as if to clear the past, he followed me inside. Grandma Ruth had prepared her famous glazed ham, fresh asparagus with lemon zest and honeyed carrots, the same dishes from that fateful Easter, now carrying the weight of a second chance. Family had gathered around the long wooden table, their chatter blending into a comfortable hum. Grandma raised her glass, her voice steady and warm. "To Michelle, for saving more than the company. Maybe the family, too." The room echoed with gentle clinks of glasses. Joseph lifted his quietly. "To Michelle," he repeated, his voice low but sincere, "for reminding me what really matters." The table conversation shifted effortlessly from school achievements to garden plans, from old dog stories to new hopes. There was space now for laughter without edge, for questions without accusation. At one point, Joseph caught my eye across the table. His expression softened, and he mouthed, "Thank you." It wasn't just for the business battles or the public battles. It was for something deeper, more fragile. I nodded in return. No words could capture the complexity of years unpacked and forgiven. Later, as twilight settled and fireflies blinked into life, I stepped outside to the porch. Joseph followed, carrying 2 glasses of iced tea. We sat on the old wooden bench, where we'd once shared secrets and dreams. "I'm sorry," he said simply, "for everything. The lies, the sabotage, the distance. I was scared of being forgotten, of never being enough." I looked at him, the brother I'd always known beneath the armor. "I'm sorry too, for not seeing your pain, for letting us drift apart." He smiled, a weight lifting from his shoulders. "So what now?" I sighed. "We build from here. No illusions, no silence. Just Joe, honesty. Easier said than done," he said. "But necessary," I replied. We sat in companionable quiet, the stars slowly appearing above the darkening sky. I thought about how far we'd come, from the Easter that almost broke us, to this moment of fragile peace. This was not a perfect ending. It was better. It was real. It was family. The road ahead would be full of challenges. Old wounds might flare. Misunderstandings could return. But now, we had a choice, to walk it honestly, together or apart, with respect as our compass. Because, in the end, that's what matters. Respect, love, the courage to forgive, and to be forgiven. And maybe, just maybe, that was the greatest victory of all. Thank you so much for following Michelle's story. If her journey spoke to you, please share your thoughts in the comments. Have you ever faced family betrayal and found a way back? I'd love to hear your experiences. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more heartfelt stories of strength, resilience, and growth.